Thank you very much, the President. That ends up the opening ceremony. We'd like to invite the speaker for the keynote speech. We'd like to also invite the speaker, the professor of the Kyunghee University, Chun-Ho, and he has also putting a lot of contribution despite his busy schedule. He was the former director of the National Institute of Meteorological Sciences, and I'd like to welcome him with a big round of applause.
Hello everyone, I'm very glad to see you. My name is Chun-Ho. I am climate scientist. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation as a keynote speaker in this meaningful venue. So I'm very honored and pleased. During the climate crisis era, why humanitarian matters, that is a topic that I want to talk about today with you and to think about it today. The sense is that because the crisis happens, because it goes beyond the infinite nature of human beings and activities. In the past, no matter what we do, whatever we break out war, we have enough natural resources, but now the what man-made has put the Earth to go beyond its finite limitation. So far, the natural resources was an economic source that we could utilize to promote economic growth. But now, the Earth is now turning back against us to attack our social, economic, and even humans' habitat, so we can call this as Earth threat. So globally, in relation to the climate and Earth-related, experts gathered and they agreed on the need to define this crisis. So they have defined the planetary boundaries. The concept of these boundaries is like this. We are running on a road and there is a guardrail, as you can see from this tiny picture. The guardrail is not to block our path, but it allows to recognize there is a risk across the fence. So while we're running on the road, we can even ride on the cliff thanks to this fence or the guardrail. So we have found out 9 elements when we are in the boundary of the green that we can think that we do have a resilience. Now, when it comes to the climate change, rather than be inside of the resilience, it is out of the resiliency realm. About 500 million years ago, the livelihoods and also all the living creatures went on to extinction, especially the dinosaurs. So we are repeating that almost nowadays. So with the rate of the extinction is also, we are getting the sense of alert that the humanity can be extinct at the rate of the dinosaurs' extinction. So, and even the forest and the land system is also at risk and beyond the risk. And microplastics are also in the realm of risk as well. In the 1950s, there was about 250,000 people, and half of them were in famine. And now the population trebled, but about 800 million people are in famine. That means that we are all humanities are eating well compared to the past. How? Because there was a green revolution. Thanks to the green revolution, we could have a productive increase by threefold. So we could create an abundant, rich food world. In order to grow more crops, we have also developed the fertilizer, the chemical elements, but the earth could not absorb all these fertilizers, so the nitrogen, just half of them are going to fix on the surface, and there have become the runoff, so causing the plankton increase in the lakes and seas. If that happens, then the water ecosystem will go bad. That means there will be the breakdown of the ecosystem of the aquaculture and the water system. And when we, for example, in the advanced countries, on average, a person drinks about 3 to 5 liters and use water of 30 to 50 liters for taking showers, for example, or taking bath. So about 100 liters per person are consumed in the advanced countries. But most of the water is used for the irrigation and watering the plants. And so the agricultural irrigation water is now in the realm of the crisis and the risk. So this is well indicated in this picture. Overall, when it comes to the earth degradation, some people say it was caused by the industrialization, but also equally importantly, there is a view that by boosting agricultural productivity, the mass consumption of water and heavy use of pesticides and fertilizers could also be the reason behind the degradation and destruction. This is most of the representative things that is causing the climate crisis. This is an excerpt, the result from the IPCC's assessment report, the sixth assessment report. And they conduct about 5 to 6 years of scientific research, and then they analyze the data and they come up with a report every 5 or 6 years. So they have renewed the report, and this is the most recent one, the 6th AR report. And from the 1950 to 2100, there is a change of the temperature indicated here. So due to the fossil fuels use, we caused the GHG emission increase at the atmosphere and increase the temperature. And we had a 1 degree Celsius increase of temperature. Why it is important? Because, however, the nature has undergone the change of temperature. And when scientists calculated over the 65 million years, there was a 1 degree Celsius increase every 1,000 years. But within just 100 years recently, the contemporary human beings actually increased the temperature by 1 degree Celsius degrees. So that means that we are increasing the temperature most strongly and in an adverse way. So after all, the nature cannot decide the future, because we have been changing the earth more than the climate by 10 times, affecting the earth to break down its system. And also, depending on the differences in the GHG emitted at the atmosphere, our fate will be changed. So as you can see from this scenario, SSP scenario, depicts when a world prioritize the GHG emission based economy, then we have like 8.5 degrees Celsius increased. But when it comes to the SSP2 scenario, it is called an intermediate scenario. In Paris Agreement, the world agreed, most of the countries acceded and joined the agreement and agreed that will limit the temperatures increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And based on this pledge, and if all countries abided by the pledge, then can we curb this trend? Not at all. With all these efforts, we could have about 2 to 3 degrees Celsius increase of the global temperature. What all this means that we need to reduce the GHG more and more and reduce temperature more and more. So the SP1 scenario indicates the sustainable development and the future. That means that it is to limit the temperature increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And when it comes to the scenario SSP 1 to 1.9, it limits the temperature increase by 1.1 degrees Celsius. But the reality is really stark because we have no room and we are also running out of time to curb such temperatures. So when you have a heat, then your body can detect some differences, right? So the climate crisis are happening across the world, as you know, but globally, they are not sensing that the climate crisis and climate changes are happening in earnest because the world is now just begun sensing the change of the climate. But if we get a temperature increase by 2 degrees Celsius, then the Earth will detect the abnormality. When you get your temperature by 2 degrees, then you have to take pill and you have to lay down. But if your body temperatures increase to more than 2 degrees Celsius, then your body will almost break down. And if your temperature increase by 3 degrees Celsius, then you may die. So what that mean? When IPCC released AR6 report, the climate scientists said that if the global temperature increases by 2 degrees, then the Earth will become really in a dangerous situation. So the scientists urged a political decision maker to take the initiative to curb the temperature increase. So at the UN level, the leaders have summoned their collective will to curb the temperature. And in the COP Paris Agreement, they have also agreed to curb the temperature. So however, it was a partially agreed agreement because it was really difficult for countries, all of the countries, to have a identical collective will based solely on the scientific evidence. So what scientists did is that they decided to meet after carrying out 5 years of studies. So after this new study, they have decided that a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase of the temperature will put the Earth in danger. So from that same meeting, the people decided that the carbon neutrality is imperative that humanity must carry out. So in 2018, IPCC General Assembly served as a venue to where the political leaders and also science leaders decided to curb the temperature limit in order and achieve the carbon neutrality. And also, we need now have another agreement to curb the GHG and temperature increase. And this will be globally first. So the temperature, 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.0 degrees Celsius, are indicating the change that happens at a 10 to 20 faster than the normal Earth planet changes.
Since 1980 until the 2019, you can refer to the incidents of the droughts, the flood, and the storms as extreme weather patterns. Back in 1980, around the world, the weather has been occurred. The number was about 250, but that has increased exceeding the 800 in 40 years, showing the threefold of the severity of showing the extreme weather patterns. That has not been taken in the rise of the global temperature by 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius, but you can also refer to the gradual increase. But since 2000, the trend has been dramatically increased in terms of the incident of the extreme weather patterns. In this regard, the water shortage, food insecurity are the reality threatening our livelihood of the human beings. Even though we have the glamorous mobile phone or semiconductors, still we cannot survive at all, and we may be in the chaos without the sufficient food. Throughout the climate crisis, this is one of the severe impacts that we may face due to the climate crisis. In this regard, since 1980, the threefold in terms of the severity of the extreme weather has been also increased. And you can also refer to one of the issues that we have to also highlight. The slide shows that from the 1991 and 2010, you can refer to the mapping patterns in terms of the climate change and economic inequity. The green colors is especially in the northern hemisphere. You can refer to that a lot of the very better outcomes from the more green lands, but unfortunately the red shows the very severe or the disaster, the vulnerable regions, and who is actually making a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions a lot. You can refer to the mapping on the regions who are emitting a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions, showing the very strong red. In this regard, we see that it's a very low the correlations from the above and the bottom for the climate change economic inequity. In this regard, for the climate change, the gap between the rich and the poor, so we see that the rich can only be losing a very small portion of their properties due to the climate change or climate crisis compared to those of the poor. But especially for the poor, because they are also having very limited properties, that means they can lose almost everything what have they owned due to the climate change. For instance, the coastal land or the very low lands, especially the properties and the land size for the vulnerable group, they are more vulnerable from the disaster. In this regard, You can refer to the such inequality vicious cycle threatening the communities. As a part of the society and the governments, not only just in equality, but also for the intergenerational inequality, you may face a lot of interlinked problems. Back in the 19, when the invention of the steam turbine, you can refer to the proportions of the carbon dioxide emissions. Now you see that 80% of the total emissions were emitted since 1960. It implies that in the era of the climate crisis, actually the root cause has been stemming from the human beings of this generation. And the more we get old, then the more we may have the responsibilities, making the threatening impacts of the climate change. Then who is getting such a severe damage? You can refer to the 1960 cohort is the group of those who were born in the 1960s, and you can refer to the patterns of the severity of the extreme weather patterns. You can refer that the 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius for such exposure to the extreme weathers has been increased. In this regard, the older and the more we get, the more responsibilities and get the severe impacts over time. Such inequality of the intergenerational the issues can be also observed from the graph here. In this regard, within the same generations or different generations, humanitarian approaches are very crucial that I'd like to highlight. And IPCC has touched upon the issues for the infectious disease, urban problems, and the environmental issues. In terms of the humanitarian approaches, you can refer to the contents information on the IPCC report with the title of the Impacts, Adaptation, and Vulnerability. The 6th IPCC report was also published in this year. You can refer to the cover design. As we are living just only one planet, as we have also inherited from the ancestors and the space that we have to inherit to other generations, this is the only planet that we can survive to enrich and to keep the sustainable, so that we have to inherit this very unique planet to our next generation. Those implications and the meaningful ideas have been also well depicted on the cover design of the IPCC, the 6th report. For such enriching an atmosphere and the planet, I'm also going to share with you some more ideas. As a type of the production tool, of course, we have been putting our efforts to increase a lot of the production, as well as the allocation or distribution of the production as one of the key social issues. But still, we also have to consider that not only just for a productional tool, but also the first priority for the survival. I mean, based on the production, sustainable, and the enriching the foundation are to be needed for the sustainability. Of course, a lot of the people have been struggling a lot of the challenges not to catch a lot of the enough fish if they also go out to the oceans. But nowadays, even though we are not really getting a lot of the fish or catching a lot of the fish stocks, but still that's a reality that the oceans has very limited the species, the marine species that we can catch. In this regard, to maintain the planet in a sustainable and enriching the manners, we also have to consider and we also have to think based on the new perspectives. In this regard, the bold transition is definitely needed. On the planet, as a type of the finite world of the resources, we cannot really transform the space, like physical space, but the solar, the UV, or the sunlight is the key fundamental. And the photosynthesis can also be one of the enablers for enriching a lot of the life species. That means about the more than 8 billion people around the world can also live together under the ecosystem. But the sunlight as an energy source could be also struggle not to really reflected into the other atmosphere. It's recommended that the amount of the absorptions and reflections of the sunlight are to be equal as we desire. But one of the heat, the Hiroshima, the nuclear power plant, or the 5 of the Hiroshima nuclear plants could be also exposing and releasing a lot of the heat, the energy, and that's about the 3.1 billion. The nuclear bombs are actually the one of the heat energy that we are facing in the atmosphere due to the climate change. Why? Because to enlarge the world of the human beings, that's how we have also threatened a lot of the world, leading to the climate change. As you can see here, waste, greenhouse gas emissions, and the fine dust are still emerging. And still, we are continuing to accumulate the vicious circle for the ecosystem as we are having more accumulations. And at some point of the time, we may also in the collapse, and we are not really in the well balance between the desired ecosystem and the reality that we are facing now. Still, we are still facing the competitions as a social community members, still as we are facing in the very fierce cutthroat competitions, because that's also for the economic development. A lot of the systems for the economic development are still ongoing around the world. At this point of the time, absolutely, it's likely to see that more the collapse of the communities. In this regard, it's not sustainable in this perspective. The energy are to be more recirculated and recycled to really maintain the planet. At the same time, we also have to consider and commit others, embrace others to keep the community spirit. Therefore, by preserving the planet and realizing the goals for communities could be very different from the traditional economic values, that's the actions that we can have the better world against the climate crisis. In this regard, we can also demonstrate the donut model. As mentioned before, the 9 finite sources or materials are embedded. So within those 9 elements, we can be sustainable. UN SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, and the 17 the goals of the SDG are also depicted here. But without those, the factors, the human dignity can be threatened. On the outer, the circle, that's the barrier that should not go beyond. But within the ecosystem, under the SDG, that's the desired atmosphere and ecosystem that would like to survive in a sustainable and a humanitarian world that would like to desire to live together. The philosophy, but ideas, but also other than that, the cities, the major cities, along with the policy makings and activities, are also trying to suggest and adopt those models for their development. In terms of the climate crisis, as we see the heavy and the storms in the sky, the dark clouds, but nowadays we have not really faced the starting point of the climate crisis. But nowadays, we also have to also preserve and increase the food for the human beings. We may also find out some of the holes in the sky. That means we can also a little escape from the climate crisis. In this regard, through the climate crisis, it is the time that we have to realize our objectives so that we can be more increasing awareness in making the better and the more sustainable world for human beings. In the human history, the for better or the livable, the world, still, as we have seen a lot of the leap forwards from the crisis, and still such human beings are having very better sustainability and the capacities to leap forward from those very daunting challenges and issues, so that based on those risk factors, we can also go beyond upon the collaborations together. In this regard, the Korean Red Cross is one of the forefront runners to achieve those goals. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.